Warm welcome to David. David, I'm the executive director here. I'm Trip Anderson, so I can unabashedly say David welcomes donations. He has his tip jar. Thank you all for coming. It's hard to believe, but this is our 5th year of Mudroom. We started up here, and we really struggled in the first few sessions to fill up this room. Tonight, I apologize. We're running about 1/3 our usual capacity for recent Mudrooms, but that's because the exhibition downstairs was not conducive to having an event like this downstairs in our main gallery. But in December, we'll be back down there, things will work again, and then we can have about 150, 160 people rather than about 50 people like we have tonight. The other thing that I will say from an administrative point of view is that wonderful thing that Ava has just done, the board of directors allowed us to do, is we have over the past 4 or 5 months been learning a new customer relations management database system, which allows us to do many, many, many more things. We went live September 1st with that system. So at the next Mudroom, it will behoove you all to become members of AVA, because members will have ticket purchasing capability benefits in advance of the general public. So if you're not an AVA member yet, please think seriously about becoming one, because we often sell out, even downstairs, a month in advance. Hopefully, it will make things much, much easier for you, much easier for us, and everybody who wants a ticket to Mudroom can have a ticket to Mudroom. But anyway, welcome to Mudroom. We love you all. We love how successful this event has become. Thank you very, very much to the organizers of Mudroom who work so tirelessly to put this together. There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. So thank you, Cheryl and Judith and Sally. I don't think Mike's here tonight. And Leanne. It is a big undertaking to do this, but we love to do it, and we love your response. Thank you very, very much. We are being filmed tonight by CCTV, Channel 8. So thank you very much for doing that. You all have a chance to be on camera, our storytellers particularly. And I understand you've all signed your releases that want to. Thank you. So this will be available on CCTV and Community TV. I remind you also that at the intermission, we will be raffling off 2 pairs of tickets to the December Mudroom and 1 individual membership for AVA. So 3 names will be called. If you have not entered your name already, it's in the basket right around the corner where the wine is. And do think of participating in that. And I know Judith is going to pitch submitting stories for the next, so I won't deal with that. But I thank you all for coming. And without further ado, because I'm not a storyteller, I'll turn things over to people who are. So Judith Hertog.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Trip. And every time there's a clamor for tickets before this event, even though there are still a few empty seats, it seems, but we were sold out. And I want to urge you, don't just wait for the Mudroom to listen to stories. You can tell your own stories in between the Mudroom story evenings. Go ahead, get together with your neighbors, your friends, have a storytelling evening at home, and then the best of those stories, submit them to the Mudroom, because we always want to hear new voices. Because storytelling is what brings us together. And often people say that they don't have stories. Not true. everybody has a story. You just have to share them and find the courage to share. Storytelling is what brings us together, and it's how we learn and how we find out that we're not alone in this adventure called life. But on that note, I want to talk about something a little bit more serious and sad. Some of you may have been here for the March story evening, which was themed, what was it? It seemed like a good idea at the time. When Kim Christiansen told a story about going out surfing and almost drowning when he was taken down by a big wave. And he's always the first to arrive at every storytelling session at the Mudroom. But last June, he didn't show up. We were surprised. He had ordered a ticket. And soon afterwards, we learned that he actually passed away just before the last Mudroom in June. On June 8th, he passed away in his sleep. So we want to keep him in our thoughts tonight as we have this evening about life and death. So yeah, let's think of Kim Christiansen, a wonderful storyteller. So let's move on to a story, an evening of stories about life and death. And I decided it would be to introduce the storytellers by asking them, I asked everyone what it really is that irritates them, what bugs them, because I feel that's how you really know someone's outlook on life. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first storyteller, Beth Ryan. And when I asked her what really bugs her, her answer was, when you come to a waiting room, a dentist, a doctor's office, and you have to deal with polite chit-chat, well, you just want to be left alone. Beth, welcome, Beth.
Had I known I would be forever identified by that, perhaps I would have answered differently. So tonight's story that I'm going to tell, I told earlier today to a group of teenage high school students, and it was a resounding sound of crickets. So hopefully this will go better tonight. Once upon a time, there was a young woman who was a farmer's daughter. And she was brave, and she was bold, and she lived in a land far, far away, Cincinnati, Ohio. One summer, Nancy decided to ride her bike across country. And when she came back, she discovered that there was a sound in her basement. And like any brave farmer's daughter, she ignored it for as long as she possibly could. And when she finally screwed up her courage to go down there with her flashlight, in a corner she saw reflective green eyes, sharp teeth, a pointy nose, and black, matted fur. So she did what any brave farmer's daughter does, and she screamed and ran upstairs and locked the door. And when she screwed up her courage a few weeks later and went back down with her flashlight, it turns out that that scrawny, matted bundle of fur that must have been some sewer rat experiment gone wrong was actually a small cat. So, feeling badly for having abandoned this cat for so long, she adopted him. Only she thought he was a her, and so she named him Kasia, which is Polish for kitty, for the female version of it. And she only discovered that she had a boy when she was clipping away some of those mats and brushing him, and managed to clip his penis. And she called us in a panic and said, "Oh no, she's a girl. No, I mean she's a boy. I clipped her penis." And so that might go some ways to explaining some of the rest of Kasha's life. So Nancy and Kasha got along well for about 10 years, and the vet said that he was probably about 2 when she got him. So about 12 years later, Nancy decided to ride her bike across country again, and she brought us the cat. And we took the cat in. Seemed like the nice thing to do for the summer so she could ride her bike across country. And when September rolled around, we wondered what had happened. So we called her, and she said, "Oh, yeah, I got back about a month ago." You mean you don't want Kasha? And we said, "Well, he's yours." And she said, "Well, I've adopted 2 new kittens." And so to this day, I'm not really sure why she just abandoned her cat. So Kasha lived with us, and 11 years later, he was still with us. At this point, he had lived through the toddler ages of 3 children. He had lived through 4 50-pound dogs. He had moved with us and lived under our porch for about 2 weeks without food and water. And he and I had worked into this relationship. Now, I'm not a huge cat fan. I don't dislike cats, but I'm much more of a dog person. So, cats are eh. But Kasha was a totally different animal. He had it in for me. It didn't matter what I did, didn't matter where I went, he was after me. At night, I'd go to the bathroom at 2 o'clock in the morning, and out of the dark, he would leap at me and claw at my legs. He would go for my clothes in the closet and claw them to shreds. Nobody else's, just mine. If he was mad for whatever reason, he would pee on my side of the bed. The rest of the family didn't see this. They saw a fluffy, sweet, yellow-eyed cat who purred and cuddled and caressed you. But me, no. This was an unholy bond. We were locked in some sort of pact. And as time went on, and now if you've done your math, you realize this is like 22 years now. And the pact I came to believe was he couldn't die until I learned to love him. So, you got that right. So at 22, not surprisingly, after many years of kidney failure and a tough life, Kasha became incontinent, and I thought, God, this has got to be the end. We've got to put this cat down. The cat's got to die, or, But the family said, "No, he's so sweet. He loves life. We'll put him outside." Okay, we'll put him outside. That seemed awfully cruel, but my wife was up to the task, and she built him a cat house that was heated. So shows you how far they loved him, this cat. And for another year, he lived outside. And he became more and more decrepit and more foul and more evil towards me, such that towards the end, I couldn't even get in the house. I had to walk around to the front and knock and hope somebody would let me in, because he would stand there and guard the door. Finally, one morning I woke up. Oh, let me back up a bit. You know how I said that I thought he was an unholy cat? Let me just present the evidence here. He was found in a deep, dark hole. He was impossibly old and impossibly sick. And he was a shapeshifter, because my family saw something that wasn't there. So finally, at 23 he is now, we wake up one morning, he's paralyzed. And I thought, oh, please, 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 please let this be the end. And finally, Jenny agreed, yeah, I think when he's paralyzed, that's fair enough. It's probably time for him to go. So I made the appointment at the vet gleefully, but I wasn't going to skip a day of work. So I came home in the afternoon finally and put him in an open cardboard box because, he was paralyzed. He wasn't going anywhere. And we drove to the vet, and we're sitting in the examining room. And I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and I thought, okay, be a grown-up here, really. Pull your big girl pants up. And so I pet him a little bit, and he's glaring at me, and I'm glaring back, and I'm saying, it's going to be okay, it'll be gentle, it'll be fine. And then the door opens, and the vet starts walking, and I glance up at the vet, and just at that moment, the cat leaps out of the cardboard box, up onto the examining table, and starts purring. And the vet walks in and pets the cat and smiles at the cat, who's, being very loving and caressing. And he says, so I understand we're here to put this cat down, but just for the death certificate, and I'm not judging in any way, I need to put a reason down. Can't you see he's fucking paralyzed? So at this point, I'm in a serious moral quandary. Do I put him down and tell the truth? Do I put him down and keep my secret forever? Or do I take him home? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. Maybe during the break, people can go ask you what happened. Or we'll never know. Our next storyteller, Andy Davis, who came here from the White Mountains in New Hampshire. Where? Oh, there you are. Well, when I asked him just now what really, really bugs him, he said, he gave me two answers. He first said he can't stand when out-of-state people mispronounce the names of New Hampshire towns, like Lebanon or Concord. And I said, oops, I think I'm so guilty of that. So he took pity and he said, well, there's something else that really, really bugs me, and that's when people say, I don't mean to interrupt, when they're about to interrupt. Thank you, Andy. Welcome.
Hi. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'd like to tell you a story. So early one morning, about 3 years ago, I drove my teenage daughter to Concord for a legislative internship program that she was part of. And a little bit before 8 o'clock, we pulled up in front of Bagel Works, and Fiona went in to order while I went to the parking kiosk. And when I got the receipt, I was brought up short by the date on it. It was March 24th, the day Oscar Romero had been assassinated. So I got inside and I sat down with Fiona and I said, Fiona, have I ever told you about Archbishop Romero of El Salvador? And she said she didn't think so. So I told her how he had been a conservative bishop on the side of the oligarchy, but shortly after he had been made archbishop, his world had turned upside down after the death squad murder of a priest friend of his who had worked on the side of the poor. And he said, I looked down at Rutilio lying there dead, and I said, if they had done that to him for what he did, I could do nothing else but walk the same road. So I told Fiona how for the next 3 years, he totally redeemed himself by making himself an agent for justice, by calling out the military over the radio airwaves, ordering the army, in the name of God, stop the repression, and how he had been assassinated while saying Mass on this day in 1980. And how 250,000 people came to his funeral. When I finished, Fiona paused for a moment and said, Daddy, what made you the way you are? I mean, I know you did human rights work in Guatemala and that's where you met Mommy, but was there any one thing that changed you? Like when Romero saw his friend lying there dead? So I told her this story. One April afternoon in 1989, I was standing on a dusty roadside south of Acapulco with a pack on my back, sweat in my eyes, and my thumb outstretched, trying to get to El Salvador where a friend was working in the labor union. Finally, a lime green pickup pulled over with a cap on the back and surfboards on the roof. Driving it were Gabe and Steve, two guys about my age from Southern California who were following the Pacific coast, hitting all the surfing hotspots from Baja to Costa Rica. So as we drove south under that big washed out Mexican sky, we talked and got to know each other pretty well, the way you sometimes do in a short time when you travel. And they told me about the magic and mystique of surfing. And I ranted about the U.S. role in the world, how our government was spending $1 million a day in a country the size of Massachusetts to kill nuns and peasants. Steve, who was only a little bit older than me, if at all, adopted the tone, the slightly patronizing, jaded tone of an older brother who wanted to save me from making the same mistakes he had made. And when I uttered one more pat phrase about how really we're all connected, he started shaking his head and said, "Man, when I'm alone on my board paddling out past the breakers, that's when I feel connected. Don't waste your time with politics, Andy. Nothing ever changes." We were together for 3 days. They took me all the way to La Libertad, an expatriate surfer hangout within an hour of San Salvador. Picture this, a whole village of shaggy bronze surfers living in their version of paradise. Well, every morning, tortured bodies are turning up on roadsides in surrounded villages. But it had the best right-hand point break, whatever that is, this side of Hawaii. The next morning, I went out to Punta Roca to watch Gabe and Steve do their thing, to see them expertly balance on their boards, carefully staying above the turmoil. And I could see the attraction. But I had a bus to catch into the capital. The headquarters of FENASTRAS, the National Federation of Salvadoran Workers, was on a quiet side street in San Salvador, in a converted concrete block warehouse. And you went in through a big black sheet metal door. And right inside the door, there were always two women with aprons making pupusas for the workers who came and went all day to eat and to talk politics. The place was a hive of activity because there was to be a big march on May 1st, May Day, to challenge the regime. And since FENASTRAS had the biggest headquarters of any of the movement organizations, there were other labor unions and women's groups and student groups with their sheets spread out on the floor, spray painting acronyms and slogans in big red and black block letters on them. Well, the march was a success. The banners were beautiful. We were a sea of people washing past those government troops lining the roadside, and nobody got shot. When I got back to New Hampshire, I settled down working at the Gap Mountain Bakery in Troy, where I could be with Anne, my baker juggler massage therapist girlfriend. And I stayed at her place a couple nights a week. And the other nights I camped out in the Mountain View Cemetery with a nice view of Mount Monadnock and nice neighbors, the Congdons on one side and the Jarvises on the other. Life was good, and the war in El Salvador seemed very far away. One evening Ann and I closed up the bakery, and we went next door to the grocery to pick up a couple of things before going up the hill to her place. She went to pick up a gallon of milk, and I scanned the headlines on the Boston Globe. And one on page 6 stopped me cold. 10 die in Salvadoran labor union bombing. With my heart in my throat, I read further. It was Finastras. The bomb was placed in a burlap sack right outside that black metal door, and it was timed to go off at noontime to cause a maximum of damage. So when it exploded, it turned that whole door to shrapnel, and the first to die were the 2 women who made the pupusas. One of my new friends was scalped by a flying shard of metal, but lived, while the men on either side of him were decapitated. Anne got back from the cooler, saw the look on my face, gathered me into her arms, and I fell headlong into a sea of human sorrow I had been barely aware of before that moment. When I finished the story, Fiona didn't know what to say. But she didn't need to say anything, because the truth is she had already had the last word. She was the last word. Because 10 years, almost to the day after the Finastras bombing, just when I was finally able to talk about it without choking up, Fiona was born in the living room of the apartment Andrea and I were renting in Keene. And my heart busted open again. And as I sat there with my newborn daughter in my arms, I felt that unfathomable love that most new parents feel. But I felt something else also. I felt a new stake in things, a new capacity for grief and loss, and therefore a solidarity with people who had ever felt inconceivable loss, and a new connection to that salty sea of human sorrow. It's not a place you can stay submerged in all the time, but on my best days I get a splash of it. Sometimes all it takes is a little reminder, like the date on a parking receipt. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Andy. Our next storyteller is Margaret Cassidy. When I asked her what she finds really irritating, it's something that not all of you may be able to relate to, but she said it's when you go shopping for a bra and you finally find one that fits perfectly, and then after a while you go back to the store to buy another one, and it's no longer sold, and you have to do the whole process of fitting again. Thank you. Now, Margaret has a beautiful story about her mother. Welcome.
The first time that I saw my mother's body fully unclothed, I was in my early 60s and she was in her late 80s. And the reason that I saw her in that state of undress was because I was caring for her. She had reached a point in her life where she had had a number of medical occurrences that led her to a point where she needed care. And we promised, my sisters and I and my brother had all promised her that we would care for her at home if it ever came to that, and it did come to that point. She had been, in typical fashion, she was. My brother had come from North Carolina to help us renovate a downstairs bedroom because she could no longer go up the stairs, steep stairs in our old house to her bedroom. And our brother was renovating this bedroom, and she's in typical mother Mary, her name Mary was fashion, was stepping from one room to the other to over a sill in our old house to see how the project was going. She stepped wrong. She went down, broke 2 places in her hip, her upper leg, required surgery, required recuperation, rehabilitation, a walker thereafter, and she could no longer continue to do so many things that she had done before. And then as time went on, there were other things that occurred with her health that were signs of her age in life, her stage in life. And she developed a cancer, and it was a cancer that had its origins in the vulvar area. And so not only was this something that was difficult for her to deal with, but for us to deal with, because she was a person she was always the strength. She was the rock of the family. That's such a cliche. People always say that. But cliches exist for a reason. There's truth in them. And she was... It was so hard for her to be needing other people's help. She had always been a person who did whatever needed to be done. She grew up on a farm during the Depression. She rode horses. She worked outside. She did all kinds of things that were physical in nature. She did that all of our lives. And riding horseback was one of her absolute most favorite things to do. And she did that well up until she was 80 the last time she rode. And so she was a strong person physically. She was a strong person emotionally. Our father was a troubled man, and he took his own life when I was 17. And I am the oldest of 4. And she held us together, and in some ways we became stronger as a family at that point. So by the time when it reached the point where she needed our care, that's what we did. There wasn't anything else that we could possibly consider doing. It was just such a turning point in all of our lives for us to become the givers of care to the woman who had borne us, who had raised us, who had always been there for us. She was one of those people, as many parents are, that her love was unconditional. One of the things she always said, I may not agree with what you do, but you always can come back home. Always. There were no limits, no conditions on that. And Lord knows, my sisters and I particularly had to cash in on that any number of times. We knew we could count on that. She was not a huggy, kissy, fuzzy, warm, fuzzy type of mother. But the love was there, always there, without question, without doubt. So the roles were being reversed. And as I cared for my mother at this point, she had really needed help with her daily toilette. She needed, personal hygiene, dressing, undressing, getting in and out of cars, eating, removing dentures. Oh, Lord. She hated that. She couldn't take them out herself, but if you ever tried to take somebody else's dentures out, she sometimes would threaten to bite me. Just kidding, but she would. She'd snap them just as I reached my finger in to take those dentures out. And so her spark was all there. Her spark was there right up to the end of her life. But the physically active, mentally active person that she had been all of our lives was gradually fading away. And life does that. We know life does that. But it doesn't make it any easier. So when I come back to talking about seeing my mother's body unclothed, in caring for her, I would give her sponge baths / washcloth baths. She hated showers, couldn't get in and out of tubs, so it was washcloth baths. And I actually had never put my hands on my mother's body in the way that I did during those couple of years where I was the main person who was doing that. And then eventually, both one of my sisters and I and caregivers also helped. But there was a time slot in there where I was the primary person doing that. And it was a revelation to me. We hug all the time now, actually, since my mom died. But we've never been a huggy family before that. And so I haven't had that kind of contact with my mom. And I still can feel, I was thinking about it driving here, of sprinkling baby powder on the curve of her back her aging back, the curve of it, what people sometimes refer to as a dowager's hump. But feeling the curve and the silkiness of the baby powder. And she really took a great deal of pleasure in that, as did I. And then some of the or also lifting up one boob and then the other boob, just, when it was hot and get the baby powder in there, and we just laugh. I mean, what else can you do? You laugh. And this is what we have. This is what life has dealt us. This is what we do. So there were times when I had to deal with things like, when you're caring for an older person or a person who's in poor health, the gamut of things that you have to do to care for a person. And my mother was never a prude, but she was very private. And there was one time when she had an accident, and we had to do stem to stern cleaning, and all she could do was just stand there with her hands on her walker by the toilet and in the bathroom and just say, most embarrassing. This is just most embarrassing. And you think about it, it's just like, whoever dreams of doing that, having to do that for your parent. And so I had to take that role of not letting it be a big frickin' deal, but just like, it's okay, Mom, we'll take care of this. It's all right. I got it. And that was an important shift, is that I could give her my strength that she had given so infinitely for so many years, and I was able to give for her. What I love about my mother's body, what I realized as I cared for her in all those variables, was her silvery white hair, which she gave to me, and her clear blue eyes, and her strong shoulders and arms. Her hands were as large as many men's, but proportionate to her body. And her full height, she was 5'10". And my mother was what used to be called a good-looking woman. She wasn't like movie star beautiful, but she was just pleasing to look at, and her features were strong, and I always thought she was wonderful, and in that regard. And I always felt I didn't look anything like my mother, that I wasn't anything like her, that we didn't have the connections that my siblings and she did, and as far as looks are concerned, as far as personalities or just connecting were concerned. So I always had this envy for the beauty of my mother externally. But then in caring for her, as I was caring for her, I just came to it was almost like a light bulb one particular day, and just as I was washing her and powdering her, and the beauty of the soft curve of her breasts and her rounded tummy that had gotten that way from bearing 4 big babies. We all were like 8, 9, 10 pounds. The person who had given us life and the body that had stood her well for so many years, and the long, lean legs, her long, lean, muscular legs. Oh, I envy those legs. She's built like a thoroughbred racehorse. Her legs, they stayed long and lean and strong for so long. And I said, yeah, but I'm built like a quarter horse, like low and like, meaty haunches, you know. It's like, I was just like, oh, I wish I had those legs. And then those legs ended in very large feet, size 12. Size 12 feet. And I can imagine growing up during the Depression and being her parents and having to put shoes on a young child and a young woman. She grew early. You know, that was a challenge for sure. And so those feet, she was not a vain person, but she was always proud of those feet. Even like, trips to the emergency room or to a doctor's checkup, or, you know, if she was getting prepped for surgery or something, and she'd like, you know, my feet, those are size 12. You know, she always brought attention to those feet. And though all those parts of her body were things that I came to appreciate in a very different way. And the hands-on. And I want to come back just briefly to the hands, because one of the tests of passages, rites of passage in our family, both with her children and her grandchildren, always has been holding up your hand against Mom's hand and seeing how much of your fingers grown. And none of us ever matched her hands. We came close, but we didn't match her hands because she had those beautiful, beautiful, long, strong fingers. And they were weather-worn and work-worn. They usually had a little dirt around the edges because she'd been in the garden or she'd been messing around with one of the horses or with a dog or whatever it might be. And as she got older, arthritic joints, I'm getting those. And those hands they were firm, but they were also gentle. There's this favorite picture we have of her and my niece, her granddaughter, and one of our dogs, one of her beloved dogs, sitting there, and she has her arm around Claire, my niece, and she has her hand on the head of the dog, and that hand, my mother's hand, cupped on the head of a dog, on the silky head of a grandchild, on the reins of a horse, a skittish horse, settling it down. Although, truth be known, she sometimes would kind of spur the horse just a little bit, you know, to see if it would, you know, just dance a little bit. Those hands were such a pivotal part of how I think about my mother. When the time came we could no longer care for her at home, despite our promises. It actually wound up being a week before she passed. We took her to hospice at Mount Scottney Hospital, and we didn't know when we went that day that it was going to be the hospice, that it was going to be that was going to be the end, that it would come down to that. But we had managed to keep her at home up until that point. And as we made that decision, I was her designated representative in all matters medical, and I didn't have to make the decision alone to remove life support, to just go with palliative care. My siblings did as well. We always knew that we would make that decision together, and we did. But still, I was the one, I had to say it because I was the designee. And standing there and trying to say that, I said, are we doing the right thing? And we were. We knew we were, but still that question, are we doing the right thing? And the doctor reminded me that, yes, you are, because you're not making this decision. She made this decision already, and she did. Thank heavens she did. But that was still something that was a struggle, definitely a struggle. But she had given us the strength of her love and of each other, and we could speak those words. And as she lay on her hospital bed, and one of those hands on her chest, and the IV with a morphine drip attached to the back of her hand, and her breath just gently coming and going, and she was aware periodically, and she could smile, and she could say, one of the things is that we have that smile is the last thing that we can remember, and also that she knew we were there, and that she didn't have any pain. And it's funny because nowadays, the daughter who thought that she was nothing like her mother, that we didn't have anything in common, that I looked nothing like her. It's funny because I'll pass a storefront window, or I'll see a photograph, or I'll glimpse in the mirror, and I'll see her and then realize it's me. Or I'll look at my hands with weather spots, age spots, and the arthritic joints beginning to form, and I do see her in myself. Thanks.
We're going to take a short break now. And again, I think there may be some papers out there. If you're inspired to tell a story, if you want to suggest a story for next time when our theme is again holiday disasters, talk to one of us and let us know that you are interested in telling a story. And by the way, I think that Kim Christian's last story was recorded and can still be viewed. So we still have him with us in his story. See you after the break.
Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll hold our raffle and then get right back into storytelling. You've got good odds tonight for some of the prizes. I'm going to hold the basket. I'm going to ask Leanne to read the names, and I'm going to ask Helen to pick the names. So I hold them up so you can't see a thing, right? Can't see a thing. Give it to Lizzie.
What is this prize? Which one is
this will be for the first pair of Mudroom tickets. First pair of Mudroom tickets.
Anita Prasad.
Let me give that. And let me write what you just won so we know. Come see Cheryl to claim your prize. And now for the second pair of Mudroom tickets. Helen.
Peter Lee. No.
Why don't we give you the ticket and you can choose who to give them to? Okay, the one final one for a single membership, an individual annual membership to Ava.
Kathy Elstrom.
I'll finish my homework here and turn things over to Leanne to introduce our next storytellers. Thank you all.
So as you've heard several times tonight, we have sold out for every mudroom over the last many, although I don't know why we have extra seats tonight. But in addition to having more people who would like to come and listen to stories than we have chairs for, we've also had more people submitting stories than we can select. So this is a great problem to have, and which I'm not trying to discourage you. The idea is, it feels like the idea is catching on. People come in and say, oh, I could never do it, and by the end of the night, well, maybe I have a story. So the next one, as you have heard, is holiday disasters, and there is a deadline for submission. The info is on this program, but it's also on the Ava Mudroom website, at Ava website with a Mudroom link. There's a Google form to fill out that's pretty easy to submit your story idea, and then we have a little committee and we make some selections. People come together and rehearse. So I encourage people to just think about all of those holidays in your past that didn't go quite as a Hallmark card. Okay, so our next storyteller is Kelso McNaught. And when I asked Kelso earlier what was it that really bugged her, she said that her son loves to wear socks of different colors, but also of different sizes. So he may have an ankle sock and a knee sock, and it just drives her crazy. Kelso.
So is it okay if I take everybody's picture? This will make me less nervous as a millennial. That would be really wonderful. Because, you know, we have to record everything. So, I mean, right. Oh, I have to turn around to make a selfie? Okay, we can do that. We can do that. Ready? Say hi. Hello. Yes. Hi, Mom. Okay. All right. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let me get out of this thing. So, as you might have read from my bio, I was a former crematory operator and remains transporter in the greater Boston area. This is my first time telling this story at all. I know you guys are like, shocking, you're so young. Yes, I know. Thank you very much. And I apologize if I seem really nervous. I've never been in front of a crowd this big unless there was some casket behind me, and I'm trying to tell everybody where the bathroom is. So please let us all enjoy me crashing and burning. No. So, like I said, I was a remains transporter for about 5 or 6 years. I got into that quite a while ago. This thing moves, by the way. I lived in Boston. I lived in Jamaica Plain. I was 20 years old at the time. And I was living with 4 other people in a 2-bedroom apartment, which, you know, as college kids, you would understand how wild and crazy that can be. I was also working 2 jobs. So during the time I would be the remains transporter, I would also be doing coffee shop work and trying to go to college and things like that. But one of the main things that I would do as a remains transporter is I would basically go and pick up bodies from scenes of death, like homes, crime scenes, mostly to the coroner, and retrieve them and bring them to the funeral home. Or I would take bodies from the funeral home and take them to Logan Airport to have them get sent down to wherever they are going to have their final resting place. The other thing I used to do a lot in the daytime was transport bodies to their final resting place at burial grounds, which leads us to believe that I will be the last person to ever let you down this world. So one day I was doing the rounds. I was standing patiently behind my hearse while a funeral procession was going on. And it was starting to disperse, but this very, very old lady came up to me. She was about my height, maybe a little shorter, which is like very short. She had these giant pink tortoiseshell sunglasses on. She had all these rings, and she's just decked out all in black. She reminded me of the old lady from the Old Navy commercials back in the day, if anybody remembered that. She had these big round glasses. And she comes up to me, and she's got a stern look on her face, and she's like, "My dear, you're not supposed to be here." I'm driving the hearse, but I'm like, "Why am I not supposed to be here?" She's like, "Because I'm trying to find another husband. You are standing me up and making me a run for my money." And of course, at that moment, I really, really had to know more about this person. She was a delight. Her name was Rachel. She was 87 years old, and she loved every second of her life, no matter what. And I also met her very tall, distinguished, thin, beautiful husband named Jacob, who also liked to wear his pants up to his earlobes. And we had a chit-chat after the service, and she was a wonderful delight, and Jacob was also amazing as well. And we got to talking, and then they came up to me and said, "We have a proposition for you." I was like, "I'm sorry, I don't swing that way." I love that you want me to sublet your wonderful place. No. Rachel and Jacob were Orthodox Jewish folk. And I'm going to get some of this wrong, so I apologize to any Jewish people in the audience. There is, at sunset on Friday night to sunset on Saturday, they have something called the Sabbath. And that is usually a time of reflection and prayer and just generally getting to know each other and having kind of family moments during the whole day on Saturday. One of the 37 or 39 laws that you have is you can't turn on lights, you can't be writing things down, you couldn't provide any work for anybody, you couldn't cook, you couldn't do a lot of these things. And so Rachel and Jacob came up and requested that since I am a Gentile, which I was like, are you sure? But no, I really am. Since I was a Gentile, they wanted somebody to come, and they would pay me handsomely for this. I would come at 5 a.m. on Saturday morning and help them cook, do some of their laundry, run errands for them, drive for them, do general upkeep things in exchange for some good company that they've never met, having some young, fresh blood in the house, as it were. And I said, please don't sacrifice me. I'd really appreciate that. No. So I gladly accepted because, of course, when you're a 20-year-old college student, you're broke, and you're like, well, let's see how this goes, you know? So I said, sure, definitely, I would love to do that. I was with them for 8 months. Again, I would get there at 5 a.m. every Saturday morning. I would draw their baths. I would give them their papers. I would turn lights on and off. I would show them how to use the TV. I would text message people that they needed a text message. I was basically something called a Shabbos goy, which meant a genteel person who basically trades in things like that. And, you know, it was well received. I think I did an amazing job. You know, I helped out around the house. These people were wonderful. I loved these folk. Rachel was just a little dynamo. My goodness. She would teach me how to wear fashionable clothing, and like she used to be a dressmaker back in New York City, and she would tell me all of these stories about immigrating over from Jerusalem back in the 40s and 50s. And how she met Jacob, her husband, and he was just a very stoic old Jewish man who would love to teach people about history. And he also taught me how to play Scrabble. Some of my fondest memories of working for them were he would teach me how to play Scrabble, but he would always kind of cheat because he would use Yiddish words and I wouldn't know anything about it. And he would taunt me saying, no, this is a word. And I said, no, I promise, I trust you, which you should never do because, you know, Rachel would be like, he's cheating. Don't listen to him, my dear. She would also teach me how to make challah bread. I had never made challah bread before in my entire life. I never knew how to cook. I was a, broke college student, so she taught me how to cook. She had to do everything verbally, though, because she couldn't write things down during the Sabbath, which is fine, because it was really wonderful to be like, no, dear, it's 3 cups of water. So, and I loved this couple. I learned about their 2 beautiful children, who had grown up and since left. They lived in this beautiful brownstone up near Beacon Hill. It was very Brahmin-like where I lived. This was circa 2006 at Jamaica Plain, so we had we weren't as of yet being gentrified, but we were getting pretty close to it. So it was really fun and kind of interesting to see how the other half lived when I grew up in rural New Hampshire, like Rider in the Woods type. So it was really great to learn about that. And then Rachel got sick. One morning I was walking to my second job and Jacob called me and said, I need you to come over right away. And I said, oh my goodness, are you okay? It's only Wednesday, I think, looking at my stuff. And he said, yes, Rachel's in the hospital and she doesn't have long. We need you to come over to Mass General. I said, okay. We went over to Mass General, and I didn't make it. I was too late. She had already died when I got there. And in my car at the time, we had a little 2-way radio dispatch. So when you call a funeral home, or when a nurse calls a funeral home, or a doctor calls a funeral home, they relay all of the information to the dispatcher at the funeral home, and then they send me, the answering service will send me, can you go pick up a body over at, here's this place, this is the funeral home that you need to take it to. And I heard the dispatch come on the two-way radio of an 87-year-old young Jewish woman, which I thought was funny, who was over at such a place in Mass General, and she would be in the morgue, and I would have to go pick her up. And I called my dispatcher back and said, did you need me to request a shomer? A shomer is a person who stays with the body in Jewish funeral customs, where they pray over the body for 24 hours, just to show that that they're not alone when they leave in death. Especially in Jewish funerals, they wrap the body up and they bury them within a 24-hour period. It's very quick. So they asked me to come get a shomer, and we didn't have a shomer available. So Jacob volunteered to shomer for his wife as the one final act of kindness that he could do for his wife. And it was heartbreaking, because here I am having to do my job, and now there is this disconnect that I have to feel by taking somebody's body, somebody I knew and grew to love over 8 short months, and having to put her in the back of my beat-up Dodge van and bring her over to the Jewish funeral home. And, I couldn't cry. I have to have when you're working, you have to have a disconnect. And I've seen a lot of death in the very short time that I've been living. And it was really hard for me to pull myself away. But I knew I had a job to do, so I had to do this job. We had our service. I was invited to the service. I went for an hour, and I couldn't do it. I was so afraid to be there. I didn't know anything. I was never a religious person. My parents were not very religious growing up. Science was always my religion. I never believed in God, but I knew that I had to be there for her. So I only stayed an hour, and I chickened out, and I left. So after a funeral goes for a Jewish person, they have something called a shiva, where you sit for 7 days, longer than that typically, but the shiva for her was 7 days. So Jacob was in the house all by himself. The family the 2 siblings were not able to make it. They had other plans, I'm not sure. So I asked Jacob if he wanted me to stay with him in his house that whole 7 days. He said, I'm okay, it's fine, don't worry about me. She was buried on a Monday, and then on a Thursday, I hadn't heard back from him. He wasn't returning my calls. So I went to go, I had a key to their house. Thank you, Thank you, Rachel, because Jacob didn't want me to have a key. So I got in my van, and I drove over there, and I started to unlock the door, and I could smell something. The scent of death has a very particular smell, and I hope that none of you ever have to have a forced option in order to smell the stench of death. I got in there. He had been dead for not sure how long, but I found him slumped over in his chair. I believe he had a heart attack. He was definitely gone by the state that I had seen him in. And I'm standing here, and I didn't know what to do. Because, again, there was this disconnect. If I see a body, this is what I have to do. These are the people I have to call. This is the stuff I need to do. But this is somebody I agree to love in a very short amount of time. And I needed to do him this one final act of kindness. So I'm not sure how long he was dead when I got to him. I was praying that it wasn't very long. I had taken his body off of the easy chair, and I wrapped him in a bed sheet, a white bed sheet. I had put the yarmulke on his head. I had called my funeral director, and I had called the Jewish Community Center that we usually call in order to have shomers come who would volunteer to go help before we send them over to be bathed at the local Jewish center. And I sat there and waited because the traffic was bad. It was Thursday. It was during rush hour. And as we all know, Boston is terrible when you try to drive in. And I felt terrible. I didn't know what to do. I'm just sitting here with this body. So, but I knew that religion was important to him. I knew that God needed to be here in the room with us. So I held his hands and I tried my best to pray in Hebrew. Unfortunately for Rachel, I was not very good at it. I am still not very good at it. So I gave up after halfway through, and I just started saying, please, God, please take him safely to where he needs to go. I was holding his hands, rocking, humming, singing, holding hands, praying, please, God, please, God, please, God, please, God, please, God, please, God. I did not leave that body for 2 hours. The only time I let him go was when shoulders came past me and a crowd of people started humming around me and chanting with me, please God, please God, please God. And I let him go. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelso. Our next storyteller is Alan Field, and he was asked what it was that really, really bugged him. And since we actually live in the same house, I know this is true. He has a very, very, very favorite kind of yogurt, and they changed it, and it's Greek now, and he hates that. Alan Field.
When my mother was 95, she announced that 95 was old enough and that she was going to stop eating. But that she would allow herself an occasional warm mug of water in which she dissolved those awful little salty bouillon cubes. Some were chicken and some were beef. My mother was someone who was a strongly opinionated woman. And none of her family were willing to challenge her request or try to persuade her otherwise. And in fact, she had done a pretty good job of preparing us for this situation. She had written her own obituary at some length. She also had written a card that we were asked to send to all the people in her address book. The card began with words that I think were intended to soften the blow. It said, "Just letting you know." Fran Field died peacefully in her home, surrounded by her loving family. And she left room at the bottom for the date. She also carefully gave considerable careful thought and attention to the organization of her memorial service. Also included was the music that should be played, and also her favorite quotes that should be read in the course of the occasion. So, in addition to all of this, she had been clearing out the furniture in her apartment. By this time, there was very little furniture left in her apartment. She had gotten rid of, passed it along to one relative or one friend or another, and everything that was left had a sticky tag behind marking who it should go to. So for a couple of months, my mother ate nothing but bouillon cubes dissolved in warm water. And during this time, she refused all medications. She got sick at one point and without any medications managed to get better. But after 2 months, she was really just skin and bones. There wasn't a lot left. And I walked into her room and she said, "I'm going to stop eating and drinking." So I was pretty sure that she could not last more than 2 or 3 days. So with some trepidation, I entered her room after 3 days, fully expecting, she might be dead. And I walked into her bedroom, and she sat up in bed, and she looked me in the eye. She said, "Alan, I've been trying to die, and it's not working." She said, "Bring me my favorite cream of broccoli soup and a glass of sherry." So my mother continued in this fashion, eating and drinking whatever she felt like. It felt like a kind of a breakthrough moment in her life. I felt like it took 95 years for her to get to this point. And she was, but she was still cleaning up, still getting rid of stuff. At one point I walked into the room and she said, "Take my shoes to Listen Center. I don't need shoes anymore." After a couple of months, she was very bright-minded. She was alert. She knew. She never failed to recognize me. And of course, she was not on any medications whatsoever. But after a couple of months, she started seeing people in the room that I couldn't see. So I, at one point, walked in through her living room into her bedroom, and she looked at me and she said, "There's somebody in the other room." I said, "I just walked through that room. I didn't see anybody." She said, "There's somebody in the other room." So, the hair is kind of standing up on the back of my neck. So I turned and I went back into the other room. And I looked behind the door. I looked behind the dresser. There was nobody there. I said, "Mom, there's nobody there." She said, "I saw a young man standing in the door and he was holding a harmonica." So I remembered in that moment that my father and mother had met as teenagers, and their first correspondence was concerning a harmonica that he had and that she wanted one just like it. So I came to the conclusion that she had seen my father standing there in the doorway, her husband who had died 48 years before. Around this time, we got quite accustomed to the fact that she was seeing people that she had loved, that she'd cared for it in her life. At one point, she said, there was a man under my bed. And we again thought this was part of the illusion that she had been going through. It turned out that actually there was some problem with the hospital bed that she was in. And somebody from the hospital bed company had come to make the repairs. But she had been asleep when he came into the room. As he emerged out from under the bed, She said, "What are you doing in my room?" And he said, "I'm fixing our bed." She looked at him very sternly. She said, "It's my bed, not our bed." Okay, anyway. So after a while, my nurse, an LNA, came into the room with a glass of water for my mother. She, at this point, she was in her bed all the time. She wasn't getting out of bed. She said, "Aren't you going to give water to the other passengers?" So we came to the conclusion that she was quite sure that she was on a train and she was going somewhere. And at this point, I was getting pretty used to these kinds of conversations. I said, "Who else is on the train?" And she named all these people, her brothers, her members of her family who had died, that she had been very close to. And one of the LNAs said, in her experience, this meant that she was close to death. And the very next day, I walked in to her room, and she had this kind of fierce look in her eye, and she said, "I want to go to the other room. I want to go to the other room." And of course, I had the sense not to wheel her bed into the other room. I said, go, be free as a bird." She said, thank you. And those were her last words. So there's a sequel to this story. This experience of being with someone at the point of death, someone that, my mother, being with my mother at that point, was a striking experience of seeing someone who had been alive, had been a vital part of my life, becomes totally still and become dead. And her body, just a waste of bones and skin, it just felt like something you drop in the trash. It was just like a total change, this change in a moment, and a great emptiness for me, and a great sense of the loss of her in my life. And it seemed like for the next few days, everything that I did was something that I did with an awareness of that loss, of missing her in my life. But some days later, I was driving my vehicle around the Upper Valley, and I stopped at a gas station with a little deli mart attached to it. I filled up. I was driving a pickup truck. I filled up my truck and walked into the deli mart. And all of a sudden, as I walked, it was just a perfectly ordinary little deli mart. But as I walked through the door and just entered that room and looked around at the shelves of Planters peanuts and things like that, and a little deli counter and the cash register and the person standing, suddenly I had a sense of my mother being there. And that she was, that in the way that I looked around the room, that she was part of that. She was there. And I haven't missed her since.
Thank you, Alan. And our last storyteller of the evening is one of our own Mudroom people, Sally Bacon. And Sally has told stories before at the Mudroom. We're happy to have her back. When asked what Sally hated, Sally hates the word hate.
So I'm glad you clarified that the question actually was what you hate, not what annoys you. I hate the word hate. In the spirit of full disclosure, I have a superpower. I really do. I have this incredible ability to find humor in the darkest of places. I mean, it has been my saving grace my whole life. Some people think it's a little sick, I'll say that, but, you know, I can see, you know, I have a great sense of humor, you know, I think so anyway, but that is my superpower. And having said that, I'm sure that everybody in this room, that there is somebody that if you think about losing, if you think about them dying, it's overwhelming. You know, you just can't wrap your brain around it. You just don't want that to happen. And for me, that person was my dad. Like a lot of women, I mean, I adored my father. My father and I were very, very close. And he was a great dad. I mean, in all the sense, you know, he was a great provider. He was very smart. He was kind. He was compassionate. But he was really funny. My dad was really funny. He actually, maybe I got my superpower from my father. He was really funny. And, you know, I could feel like the whole world was falling apart. And my dad would say one thing that, you know, it just made it okay. It didn't matter how bad things were. And just to give you an example, I'll just give you one example. My younger brother was in a horrible, horrible car accident. He was 25 years old. He was in a coma. He had been in a coma for 5 days. We were all sitting around the bed. And it was really stressful because, you know, I mean, we all loved my brother a lot. But he caused my parents a lot of heartache. He had started using drugs. He was really volatile, disrespectful, angry, mean. You know, I mean, it was a tough couple years before his accident. And there wasn't much conversation around the bed. And then the doctor came in, and he asked us to step outside. And the doctor said, you need to understand that even if Michael survives the coma, he will never again be the same. And my dad goes, really? He goes, is there any chance he'll be nicer? Do you think he'll be nicer? He's going, yes. And so my father and I start laughing hysterically. The poor doctor was like, what? And my mother, who does not have our superpower, she did not think it was very funny. And but that's the way my father was, and you know, I just couldn't imagine living without him. And as he grew older, he was getting very frail. He had survived triple bypass surgery. He survived 2 aneurysms. And I was taking him to the VA hospital once a week because he had several aneurysms, and they were watching those aneurysms. And we were sitting out in the backyard one evening, and my dad looks at me and he said, you know, Sal, I'm really tired. I said, what? He said, I'm really tired. And I said, you know, what do you mean you're really tired? I mean, my father, all right, he looked a little frail, but his spirit was just, I mean, he'd walk into a room, and I mean, he had this big live spirit and energy, and he said, you know, he goes, baby, I'm tired. You know, if it was time for me to go, I would go. He said, I'm tired. And I went to bed that night, and I was in such a panic. I thought, oh my God, he could die. I mean, my father seriously could die, and I won't have him anymore. And I couldn't sleep all night. And so I got up the next day, and my dad came over, and I go, okay, listen, I gave this a lot of thought. Okay, I said, you sort of freaked me out last night. Gave this a lot of thought. You cannot just drop dead. You cannot have a heart attack or an aneurysm. I said, Dad, listen to me. You got to do this for me. I said, you've got to get really sick. I said, I mean, really, you know, like stage 4 or something. Stage 4, maybe a tumor that they can't operate on. I said, you have to get really sick and suffer. And then I'll be by your bed, and I'll hold your hand, and I'll be like, oh my God, I said, you'll have tubes. And I'll be saying, oh God, please don't let him suffer. I can't bear to see him this way. And then I could let you go. And my dad looks at me and he goes, okay, let me understand this. He goes, you want me to get really sick. I said, yes, you have to get really sick. And he said, suffer. I said, I won't let you suffer long. I said, you'll probably have a lot of morphine and stuff, and you won't even realize you're suffering. So he said, babe, I'll see what I can do. So about 2 months later, my husband and I had an early morning meeting, and we were in his car, and my dad was taking my dog to the vet. Or he was supposed to be taking my dog to the vet. And the phone rings, in the car, my husband's phone rings. And he answers it on speakerphone, and he says, this is Bob Bacon. And the voice on the other end says, Mr. Bacon, this is the Phoenix police. You need to get to your mother-in-law's. Your father-in-law's dead. Well, I start screaming, no, no, not my dad. Maybe he means your dad. He could mean your dad. He might be confused, And I was like, I couldn't be responsible for what I was saying. I was hysterical. So we get to my mother-in-law's, we get to my parents' house, and I go running in, and there's police there because apparently it's a law that if you die an untimely death, if you die at home, the police have to stay until the funeral home gets there. And I run in, and my father's lying on the floor, and, I dropped to the floor, and his body was really warm, and he didn't look dead to me. I mean, really, he was warm, and his eyes were open. And can we just talk about that for a minute? I mean, I thought they, closed your eyes. No, he was looking a little, out there. But he didn't look dead to me. And so I'm like, he's not dead. Can't you please help him? I don't think he's dead, And they said, we did everything we could for your father, and my husband came over and held me, and we cried. And so I went into the bedroom where my mother was, and she was sitting on the bed, and she was still in her nightgown, and she was angry, and she was agitated, and that's the easiest emotion for my mom to get to. So I said, what happened? And she said, well, your dad was going to take your dog to the vet. He came in. He asked me if there was anything I needed. I said no. He kissed me goodbye, and I thought he left. She said, I get up to go have a cup of coffee. He's dead on the couch. I'm like, so I go and I call my best friend who lives nearby, and she was very close to my dad too, and I'm crying, Deneen, you got to get over here, my dad's dead. So I'm back on the floor with my dad, and Deneen comes running in, and she's crying, and I said, Deneen, he looks really good, don't you think? I said, he doesn't look dead. And she was a spiritual care counselor for hospice, and she said to me, he looks really good, but he's dead. And I said, oh, fine, And I said, well, he had his little deck shoes on and his Bermuda shorts and a plaid shirt and his smokes in his pocket. He was a smoker. And so we started, sharing stories about my dad, and I realized that he died. It was Wednesday, and Wednesday was my dad's favorite day of the week. All days led up to Wednesday, because Wednesday was off-track betting day. And my father liked nothing better than betting on the dogs. So I'm like, it's Wednesday. And she goes, oh my God. And I thought, he should have died Thursday, so he could have placed one last bet. And so, we're sitting there talking, and I said, just last Wednesday, well, my father and I, to back up a little, I know nothing about betting. I know nothing about betting on the dogs, but my father always felt like he'd come over and tell me what went on at the, betting, what he bet, how, if he won or not. He'd come on Thursdays. And he told me he couldn't win. He couldn't win because he didn't have enough money. He needed to bet the, I don't know, Quinella or something, he had all these things. So we became partners. And so I looked forward to Thursdays with the same enthusiasm that my father looked forward to Wednesdays, because he'd come over and give me a blow-by-blow. What happened? So just last Thursday, I was telling Deneen, I said, he came over and he's like, babe, the first race I felt really confident about. Bet $20, we won 15. Second race, that dog, I really wasn't sure about that dog. I only bet 20, we won 7. The third race, I said, Dad, wait a minute. We didn't win 15. I mean, we lost 5. I mean, we didn't win, And I said, and we didn't win 10, we lost 3. And he started laughing. He goes, oh, that's one way to look at it. So while I'm telling her this, I hear my mother screaming in the bedroom for me. So I go in, I go, what's wrong? She said, get him out of here. I said, what? She said, I want you to get him out of here. Get him out of here. It's been like an hour and a half. I'm like, well, what do you want me to do with him? So I start laughing. Now I'm laughing really hard. And I go out and I go, all right, pick them up. I said, we're going to put them in the car, and we're going to set them up, and we're going to give them a cigarette, and we're going to give them one last, drive around the neighborhood, and then we'll take them to the funeral home. And so we're laughing, and I go to, I put my arm under my dad, and the cop's like, no, you can't touch the body, you can't touch the body. So I'm just, really laughing, and so is Deneen. And my mother's yelling for the policeman, so he goes in the bedroom. And I said, get the stuff out of my dad's pockets. What's in there? We better get the stuff out before the funeral home comes. So she pulls out change, and she pulls out a little, grocery list, and he had a wallet, and she goes to get his cigarettes out of his pocket, and there's something behind the cigarettes. And she pulls it out. And he had this little betting book that he wrote. I swear to God, I never understood what was in there, but there were every date and the numbers of the dogs and percentages. And he studied the dogs like most people study the stock market. And he had this book with him at all times. And she goes, look, it's his betting book. And she gave it to me. And I was... I just held that book. And we heard the funeral home coming. And she said, you might want to go in with your mom when they come. And so I bent down to give my dad a kiss. And I bent down, and then I went, kind of did a double take. He winked at me. I know he did. I saw him wink at me. I don't care what anybody else thinks, but my dad winked at me. And I started laughing, and I said, I love you, Dad. And I went in the bedroom, and they bagged him up and took him, and that was that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Thank you all for joining us tonight. The next Mudroom is December 13th. Holiday disasters. We were going to say holidays gone awry. Holiday disasters. Think about stories you might have. Avail yourself of the new ticketing system at Ava, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you for coming.